Hey there, you're listening to Making Spaces, the podcast about community, culture, and making new connections, hosted by my good Judy, my friend and yours, Sarah Heath. On this podcast, we're having conversations about design, literally making spaces, and how some of the most inclusive spaces aren't always the most inviting. And we're talking about what it means to make space for one another. With the world the way it is right now, we need to find ways to have conversations across lines of radical difference. So join Sarah each week as she tackles the intersection of design and practical spirituality with conversations with some of the most fabulous guests you're ever going to meet. Some will talk about actual design, some of us will talk about relational design, but no matter what, it's an incredible time. So grab yourself a cup of whatever you like, and welcome to Making Spaces with Sarah Heath.
I think about the way men respond to discussions of feminism and patriarchy.
Yeah.
And it's because, we have this amazing brain stacked in 3 layers. And the 2 inner layers, they're obsessed with 2 questions. Am I safe and do I belong? And we've created a system where if you're a man and someone begins to speak about the dangers of toxic masculinity, you start to wonder if you're safe and if you belong, and then you can no longer meaningfully participate in that conversation. And instead you're confronted with feelings that you don't want to feel, and so you have to get kind of defensive. You have to go into defensive strategies to regulate those feelings that if we had more access to, we can meaningfully participate.
Guys, I know every week I tell you I'm excited to share with you both the conversation and the featured guests on Making Spaces, and it's true. Each week I'm excited because I can't believe I get to share these conversations with these incredible space-making humans. Every week I'm in awe of the wisdom and challenges that these conversations create, and that is certainly true for our next guest. This week's guest is Mike McHargue. He's also known as Science Mike, a nickname I actually gave him and had no idea just how beloved it would become. Mike is a public educator trusted by millions to use empathy and deep scientific insights to help them navigate some of the most difficult parts of the human experience. Through his podcast, Ask Science Mike, and in both of his books, Finding God in the Waves and his newest book, You're a Miracle and a Pain in the Ass, Mike is making space for people to engage all parts of themselves. He's been featured in The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Washington Post, NPR, all over the place. He's been a guest at MIT and Google as a featured speaker. Our conversation talks a lot about our need to make space for both our cognitive and our emotional capacity, and how when we do that, we are able to be more present to others and make space for more people. Stick around after the end of our conversation for the weekly takeaway, along with an inspirational quote and a little announcement about the show. I would like to talk about making space for our own brains and for being neurotypical or neuroatypical with you. Because your book is so good. It's so good.
Thank you.
I will admit to staying up too late reading. So the first question, and because I don't want to like Oprah always wants to capture everything. I think I just compared myself to Oprah. Thank gosh, this is what gets cut out.
I think it's a favorable comparison for Oprah.
Yes. Question is this: if you could think of, it can be any space. There's no real rule. Is there a space that you love, and then why? And just so you, like Rob Lee said, time was his favorite space. So you can get like that weird and layered with it. Is there a space that you love and why? I knew it'd make you squirm.
I'm trying to give you a good answer. There's several ways I could go.
It doesn't have to be favorite. That's what always throws people, is when I used to say favorite, but now I just say, what's a space?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I heard the distinction and appreciate it. A space that I love is the space created by someone who listens actively.
Yeah. And why do you think that is?
Because I'd never seen and didn't understand active listening for most of my life, actually. And once I saw that, I thought, wow, what a magic trick. And how can I learn to do that? Real active listening because we're social animals,
Mm-hmm.
it lets us learn and discover things about ourselves that we didn't know. And active listening is the cherry on top of a well-tended and curated inner landscape. You can't be an active listener unless you've really done a lot of your work, which is why I'm not always able to be
An active
listener like I would like to be. But when I see people who do it well, it speaks a lot about who they are and the journey they've been through in their life.
Mm-hmm. It's also a little unnerving, isn't it? Like in a good way, when you're sitting with someone who is a active listener, and it's almost like oh no, they're really listening to me, and that puts a lot of pressure. You both appreciate it, but it gives it a depth that sometimes we're not used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had to do a lot of therapy around codependency to be able to appreciate instead of be terrified by active listeners.
That actually makes sense to me, because you're like, I don't know what to do with you being okay holding what I'm saying.
Right. Like when you're performing, they're like, "Whoa, it's okay. I don't need to perform it." It's like, well, what do you mean? Then what do I do?
I don't know how to. Actually had a therapist say to me recently, "You can't do anything," and I was like, "I don't understand what you're saying." Like, you have to feel the feeling, and I'm like, can I pass? Is there another
I know
option?
these are all words in a language I understand, but I don't understand them together.
Like, I literally had a pen out, and I was like, "So what do I do?" And she's like, "Yeah, no, you're just gonna have to feel through this." And I was like, I have a pen, so I need to have some information here.
Action item: feel through this.
I need to check off emotional healing. So if we could just sort of move through this, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
I loved in your, so your book does such a great job of kind of the title alone. You're a miracle and a pain in the ass, making space for what I would say sort of is the tension of truth, right? Everyone, like, you're a special snowflake, but also, like, there are some things we hold in common, and some of the things we do are really frustrating to ourselves and others. Can you talk a little bit about why this book? Because I know it started out as something else, and I know you've said this a lot on your book tour, but I think it's a neat story about this wasn't the book you set out to write.
Yes. First, I have to make a comment.
What?
We are sitting here on opposite sides of a major American city.
It's true.
And we're in a pandemic.
Uh-huh.
And I know you so well, and I've spent so much time with you, that as you talk, I can see the facial expressions you're making, and I can see the way that you move your head, and my brain reminding me of all those delightful things that I love about your affect and how emotive and how expressive you are. I just miss you so terribly just right now, and I just wanted to name that, because otherwise I can't continue with the conversation.
I have goosebumps, and I miss you too, and I think it's hysterical for the listener who is listening to the podcast. Right before he said how you move your head, I had moved my head. He does know me really well. It's true. It's true. I'm so grateful for that. Thank you. Yeah, because sometimes I think it's just not the same as sitting together in a living room. And actually, you read your first chapter of this book to me, gosh, a year ago maybe? And it lingered with me. I actually got your book and couldn't read it for a day because I knew that chapter was in there.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah. Why this book?
Well, I just always write the book that I need. And if somebody else needs it too, then that is wonderful. But I write the book that I need to survive. And this book didn't begin that way. It began with me in a season of my life where I thought I had a lot of answers to people's questions.
Yeah, you were kind of killing it at that point in our stupid way of measuring that.
Yes. And so I was like, I need to write a book about how to kill it.
I'm now an expert. Gather around.
Yes, all people come gather around my wisdom. And then I stopped killing it, to use our little ad hoc vernacular here. My life got really bad. And some of those circumstances were external, but some of them were me responding to external circumstances in maladaptive and self-destructive ways.
Yeah.
And I started, I don't know, I shifted so quickly from kind of self-assessed expert to just trying to survive and make it through each day. And every time I thought, well, at least it can't get any worse, it did.
Ugh. It's almost like the audience would be like, if that's in your head and we're watching the TV show, and at least it can't get worse. And then you hear the narrator go, but it did get worse. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. And it just did over and over and over. I started having panic attacks and then severe panic attacks. And then my daughter Madison was diagnosed with anorexia, and we started trying to struggle with that, which put our family under huge financial strain. At the same time, I was getting treated for trauma and PTSD, which was very expensive and increased that financial strain. And then we had to do family systems therapy because of all the therapy changing our patterns were making things difficult in our home, and then that was expensive. And I got heart disease from all the stress and all the self-medicating behaviors. And our friend Rachel died.
Yep.
And I was diagnosed with autism.
It was quite a season.
Ding, 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 ding. And so I just kind of wrote a book about my struggle to love and accept myself as my life fell apart. Which, and there's not, the end of the book isn't, and then I got it all back together. My life is still pretty fractured. I'm still recovering from the period of time in which you read about in the pages of that book. That book is not about becoming some finished product, but learning fundamental things of self-acceptance, self-worth, self-love, and learning to relate to one's own feelings.
It's fractured, but it's true. Your life it might feel fractured, but it's honest and it's true. And I think that's the beauty of what, obviously we can't always say there's something beautiful about everything, although there is something to making meaning of things. And it feels like this beautiful chance for your honesty to compel the honesty of others, but it really sucks because you're like, no, I liked just giving the polished version of myself, and I was hoping that would inspire people.
Yeah, I've always tried to be honest. What I realized in the writing of this book is I was honest with everyone else only to the degree to which I was honest with myself.
Oof.
And so this season of my life has been getting more honest with myself, and as I've done so, actually sharing less with an audience. I've for the first time in my life started to practice perhaps some small, trivial amount of discernment in what I share immediately and publicly. As I've learned to kind of grow and change.
Yeah, it's a hard process, I think, to know what to share and what to be honest about, and especially if you have any sort of public voice, what to let incubate a little, what to keep as yours, because sometimes we can actually damage people that we're trying to help when we, reveal what we're working through, and it might be in a place that's not helpful for others, and it's so hard to know that. So hard to know that. And I just applaud your ability to do it. And then your moments when you feel like you haven't got it quite right and you're just like, well, that wasn't it.
Swing and a miss.
I mean, I think about the times I'll go on Twitter and something's happened and you'll have stood up for someone and then someone's like, I actually didn't need you to stand up for us. And you're like, my bad. It's such a neat thing to see someone who's so willing to be okay with oh yeah, I'm just trying like everyone else, and it offers just grace for other people. I was thinking about, so yesterday was the anniversary of the death of our friend, and we saw each other, I guess it was the day after. And you had a difficult panic moment. We were at a concert for our other friends trying to support them. And I drank more than I normally do. And I realized it was just such a numbing experience of wanting to disappear because I didn't want to have to deal with how I actually felt. And so I'm so grateful to have our community, because I was really embarrassed to our friends who had to drive, and that's not what I do. I'm a pastor. I don't drink too much, which is not always true, but I don't do these things. And to have one of our friends said, but you're also a human who lost a friend. And I was like, oh, right. I can give myself, maybe don't, obviously I wasn't driving, so there was not complete irresponsibility, but I just felt so much pressure to have a good thing to say about, what happened. And for me being, our friend group, you guys were, I hate that we measure these things, but you guys were closer to Rachel than our friendship had just started. And while it was beautiful and wonderful and was devastating, it's almost like I felt like I couldn't feel it in the way that I wanted to feel it. And now I'm just grateful even for, I don't know if you saw her husband's beautiful article about,
I did.
Grieve it how you're going to grieve it. I'm grieving a tree today. And I thought, oh, thank you. Because I realize when I give myself permission to grieve, I'm giving other people permission. So thank you for giving other people permission to look inside at their brain. So talk a little bit about the book. You're a Miracle, Pain in the Ass, Embracing the Emotions, Habits, and then I love this mystery that make you you.
Yeah, it's just your basic cognitive, psychological, behavioral, economics, interpersonal, neurological examination of Paul's dilemma.
Yeah, clearly. Thank you for saying. I was afraid I was speaking too much. I wanted you to say it. What the hell does that mean?
It's a look at, Paul's dilemma is this I don't understand myself. I do what I think is wrong, and I don't do what I think is right, effectively. Paraphrased wildly from what Paul wrote in Romans. And, I've been on a weird faith journey, and I've started reading my Bible again. And I've even started to read some of Paul's stuff again, which was kind of the last part of the Bible I could relate to again, because Paul and I...
We broke up in college, but we occasionally talked about our friend Jesus.
Yeah, I think that is a very accurate statement for me and Paul as well. But I read that line and I was like, all right, Paul, okay. I see you, or you see me, or something just happened. Felt some kind of a connection. And so that kind of central tension was something that was really on my mind a lot.
Yeah.
Why do I have heart disease and still want to eat pizza or Oreo cookies, even though I know the consequences for my health are disastrous? Not just bad, disastrous. And so the book is me going through, peeling back the onion of the human person and looking layer by layer at where those conflicts with ourselves come from and how we can struggle with ourselves less.
Yeah, it's sort of that idea of especially for you where knowledge is so important as you think about, just even the way that your brain works, which I love, but you've never met a question you're not willing to research. So for you, you're one moment, please. And you turn around, if you don't know the answer,
Accessing.
You're right. And so for you to know, no, I know, and knowing is important to me. I know what's right, but I can't do it. Mm-hmm. And that dissonance between the two is, I would say, the human condition and story. And what's funny is I think we are most awful to people when we ourselves aren't able to recognize that in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
No, I can follow rules, so you need to follow all the rules.
Mm-hmm.
I get feisty when people don't follow rules because I don't have grace for myself, so why would I have grace for you? And I think that's the beauty of examining it. Have you found, as you've sort of been sharing it, has there been a surprising reaction from people?
Wait, it just came out. The nice thing about a pandemic is people are making it through the book faster than they usually would.
Right.
So I have noticed I'm getting feedback quicker than I got on the first book. Most of what I'm getting so far, I think, is people saying that they cry a lot reading it, and that they now want to reread it.
Yep.
And so I think maybe if some of the ideas in that book are new to you, if you haven't done like trauma therapy or emotionally focused therapy, reading the book is just like this tiny first step on a journey.
Yes.
And I would imagine that people would need to go back on certain areas on like emotional grounding or emotional awareness, and then try to figure out, now, how do I actually try or practice this today and for the next 6 weeks or 6 months? And then maybe come back and read this part again. It's not, my last book was a bunch of questions, basically, and a bunch of responses that
True.
you could apply if they were helpful to you. And this book is much more like, here's some theory and some stories of mine about some things that can only be put into practice through like really gradual self-work.
Yep.
And so you can't it's not like 15 days to a new you. It's like, here's the first 3 steps of 3,000 on a road to a more satisfied self. Which is it's not an incredible tagline for an ad campaign.
It's weird that didn't do well.
Yeah, the publisher turned that down immediately as the title, but I kid. Yeah, that I'm pleased how many people are receiving the book with the intent with which it was sent.
Yeah,
That's been really encouraging to me.
it's a lot of hard work to look at it, and it's I am laughing because I'm just realizing I read our friend Jen Hatmaker's book about being fierce and free and full of fire, and they're all the kind of books that you like read a chapter and you're like, that was a good chapter, and then you're like, oh crap, that means something a lot, and I have to like think about how that actually has, like, how am I going to respond to that, because if it's a challenge, and it's unfortunately, this is not a spectator sport. And I know you hate sport analogies, but this book is not a spectator sport. It's like you have to participate in it, or you're just sort of like, again, you're just doing that thing where you're collecting knowledge, which usually when people just collect knowledge, it's in order to like hoard it over people, right? Like, I know the thing, the stat, but like lived and shared experience. Woo. Now you're talking about church. Like, that's the hard work.
Yeah, and for a Mike McHargue book, there's actually not that much information in this book.
I know. I think I only looked up so far 2 words, so I feel good about myself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think I talk about physics the whole time.
There's always time for a appendix. What is
That's
that
true.
appendix?
There's 2 appendices. Those are probably the densest areas in the text.
I think if you were to sort of say that what you were hoping to land for folks is that they would see themselves in the tension as okay. Is that a correct read of it? Like, it's going to be a long journey, but that's okay.
Yeah, but okay. I don't want people to see themselves as okay. I want people to adore themselves. I want them to look in the mirror and think, what a marvelous creature I see right now. And we have such deeply indoctrinated shame that such a notion sounds absurd or even, narcissistic or something. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a deep well of self-grace and self-gratitude and self-love. Because when you have that, you stop being so obsessed with self. You stop being plagued by such insecurities all the time.
Yes.
On the days that I really love myself, I am the best listener and the most supportive friend, because I take care of me. And on the days when I struggle more with my own worth and my own belonging and my own acceptance, are the days that I am the most difficult friend and I am the most difficult for myself to live with. And that's why the book is so centered around helping us take a redemptive perspective towards the things that aggravate us the most about ourselves and our lives.
We're going to take a brief break from this conversation to listen to some messages from our sponsors that make this podcast possible. I even think about myself and the things that frustrate me about other people, the moment when I actually look at it, quite often, if I'm willing to be self-reflective, it's because it's something in me that I have shame about. Mm-hmm. Like, how dare you live in a way that I wish I could live? Or how dare you, like, be the part of me that I don't like? Or I don't give myself permission to be, whatever it might be. And I think there's this nasty side to it. And I think, honestly, our country is in the midst of othering people with this very, like, we are going to just make it sound like bipartisanism is everything. Like, how can a virus be bipartisan? But we've seemed to figure it out, and make it so that we are nothing alike. We are nothing alike. And, this is an entirely different kind of person, and this is an entirely different kind of person. But when you do that, it's quite often because you don't want to self-reflect. I find the people that are least angry are usually the ones who have done a lot of self-reflection and not in the narcissistic way. And there is a really bad narrative out there that to reflect is to be like, there can be some navel gazing that can be difficult for people to swallow sometime, but if it's at least trying, I think it's good. I think there's a need for it. In the book, you explain a little bit about people's brains. When you think through the ability to have grace for other people, what do you think is the biggest step for you? Has it been kind of looking at your own brain?
No, actually, the brain stuff comes easiest to me.
Okay.
So, like, because it's easy, it's not as helpful. The hard stuff for me is looking at feelings, how feelings interact, and the role feelings play, and getting to honor and accept the feelings that I find difficult or shameful, like sadness or anger. Mm-hmm. That's been the hardest work for me on that journey. But for other people, it'll be something else.
Yeah, for sure.
That's kind of why I take that approach in the book of, here's some stuff about the brain and how the brain makes you really drive yourself crazy. And then here's how feelings make you drive yourself crazy. Here's how compulsion cycles and supernormal stimulus lead you to drive yourself crazy. Here's how social media and digital media make you drive yourself crazy. Here's how relationships make you drive yourself crazy, and just kind of hit ding, 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 all these different areas. Because obviously I struggle with all of them to some degree. Mm-hmm. But I tried to look back at all the questions people send me.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of look at where people struggle, and then reverse engineer a book from questions so that it would resonate with the most number of people possible.
Yeah. I find it, when we go out in public, I brought my friend with me one time when we went to hear our other friends speak, and this friend of mine is just not in our world at all, right? So, like, we have an aggressively specific niche where you and a couple...
Aggressively specific?
It is.
I love it.
It's true. Like... The people who love you. Yeah. It's aggressive. But in a great way. Like, even your voice, people hear your voice and know who you are. So we were going to my friend's show, which my friend didn't know who he was or what he did, because he didn't grow up in a Christian background. And so came with us. And it was at had a little bar in it, and we were just sitting chatting or whatever, and people would hear your voice and come up and ask you very deep personal questions, so they would say, or just want you to know, hey, this helped me do this, right? Beautiful, beautiful things. And it was wonderful, but I laughed because my friend was like, he kind of looks at me later and goes, who is he? Because we had like gone and had dinner and like hung out, and he just knew you as my friend. And he was like, he's like really famous, but like, I don't, for what? And I told him, he was like, oh, that's really cool. Because we were talking about science. And I said, people who have gone through particularly faith deconstruction or reconstruction or adjustment, there is this tenderness, like, and you do such a good job of walking with people in that tenderness. And then you also have this other world of scientists or people who are like me, science minded. Like I would say I enjoy science. And you do such a great job of sort of bridging those two things together for exactly, I think, the reason, because one group struggles with one thing and one group might struggle with another. And then it's so wonderful and such a gift. And I think it comes out of your own desire to like make sense of it together. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I'm science minded, and science tells me that feelings are the primary driver of human behavior.
It's true.
And then in science communication, we tend to ignore people's feelings. And they're like,
Fair.
why aren't they responding? Well, maybe we need to bring in some emotional literacy and emotional awareness. I would dare and say an emotional focus into public science education and advocacy. Because science really can help us solve a lot of problems, so many problems. But it needs a better bedside manner if it's going to work into people's daily lives.
It needs some rebranding.
Yeah. It needs deep rebranding, and it just needs a different approach to communicating with people. Like, we are not primarily cognitive oriented organisms, and science tells us that. And yet so often we, as people who love the sciences, can be guilty of assuming communicating the data and the information is enough.
But I gave you the data.
Right. It's like, yeah, there's literally a chart right here.
Here are the 5 reasons why this should happen.
Well, I mean, I think about right now, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and the epidemiological picture is so clear, and also the cell phone data is so clear that people are not staying home.
Correct.
And it's because, from a public policy perspective, we're not doing a good job of helping people meaningfully address their fears and their anxieties. And so, in desperation, they are seeking the kinds of things that make them feel better, going outside, seeing friends, doing those kind of things. And our failure to communicate in a way that resonates emotionally will have a cost in human lives, and that cost will be significant.
Yeah, it's the, it's a weird trope, but it is kind of true that sometimes people that are incredibly science-minded don't have the ability to necessarily see why that gap is important. And it's almost like you have to show the emotional connection between the two. I think there's such a giftedness in figuring out how to tell a story in a way that connects people to the meaning of the information you're giving them. So giving, like, just almost like the same reason I use the Bible when I start preaching, even when sometimes I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this, but it like lets people like kind of start in the information and then maybe dig a little bit deeper, right? So it's like, here's some facts, but then let's like connect that to emotions. And the same reason emotions shouldn't be disconnected from science, right? It's a two-way. We need each other a lot, is all I'm saying. Our heads. I would love for you to explain the right and left brain thing, because I think it's great for people to understand that it is not all or nothing.
Yeah. That's one of the parts of the book that I researched, and I was like, wait, what? And learned I was wrong about something I say all the time.
Go.
So there's this notion really in like pop neuroscience that people are right brain or left brain. And that's because your right brain is creative and your left brain is analytical. So if you're a left brain person, you'll grow up to be an accountant or a lawyer or something where you just like crunch numbers and ideas cerebrally. And if you're right brain, you'll grow up to be an artist or a writer or a poet. And that's a really dated model in neuroscience. It's very old.
But we still hear it.
Well, it's because it communicates clearly. It helps people identify themselves. So you learn that and immediately you go, oh, wow, I'm so smart. Now I know I'm right-brained, right? It's like it's very gratifying. So it doesn't matter that it's wrong. And as, you know, our understanding of the brain has gotten more advanced, we realize, like, the left brain is reductive. It sees pieces and parts. And the right brain is holistic. It sees the whole of something. And that means your left and your right brain are involved in analytical reasoning. And your left and your right brain are involved in creativity. The left brain tends to take more of a top-down approach. It begins to begin in neocortical structures of the brain and move down in its processing. The right brain, on the other hand, tends to start with deeper brain structures and move out towards the neocortex. And
I'm just picturing your plastic brain that I love, that whenever we have these conversations, even if we're in your living room, you bring out.
It is right here next to me. I'm holding it in my hand, so well done. And I also, you can't see, I have a pointer, and I'm pointing to pieces of the brain.
Oh, no, I can see it inside my mind. It's great. Keep going.
And so what we realize is in Western society especially, we have a tendency to train people that the left brain's approach is better. And the right brain offers a necessary, even essential check on the reductive capacity of the left brain. Because of its ability to see the whole, it does a better job of like resonating with other people's experiences. And that means like when we just go kind of cognitive reductive, we can go to some really dangerous, wonderful places. Don't get me wrong. I like penicillin.
Penicillin's good.
I like Wi-Fi. I like all those things that come from cognitive reductive thinking. But if we're not careful, if we don't let our intuition and our feeling brain and our holistic brain offer a check on our cognitive reductive brain, it can take us into really dangerous places. And so, part of the thrust of my work lately has been helping people understand that dichotomy in their brain so that they can try to bring their experiences into more balance. If you are a totally person who's living in a reductive headspace, like learning to integrate more holistic thinking, if you're primarily cognitively oriented, learning to bring in more intuition and feeling, and the other way, if you find yourself thrown around by the whims of your feeling and intuition, then maybe you need to learn to process your feelings more completely, and you might need something like cognitive behavioral therapy to come in and invite your cognitive brain into the process. But for people who are overly cognitive like me, cognitive behavioral therapy sometimes is like an excuse to go deeper into patterns that are destructive. And then you need something like emotionally focused therapy. And so the whole thrust of what I'm talking about here is there isn't like a one-size-fits-all mental health solution. There's a process of assessment and learning and then applying specific strategies that help you kind of achieve a greater sense of balance compared to where you began.
Yeah, I think that narrative that's most harmful is for people who have always been told that they're highly intelligent. Like, you're very, what's great. Oftentimes those are the people who struggle the most because they have been celebrated for going into that headspace. So it's like, okay, I'll just go back. This is a problem I can solve. Here's how I'm going to solve the problem. And the problem isn't with your thinking. It's the Paul thing. Like, you can think this thing, but are you feeling this thing? And that doesn't come easy. It's not something you can check off. It is something you have to actually do practices with and help yourself experience in a way that can be really uncomfortable. I think it's such a beautiful thing for you to invite people into that journey. And I would say, offer them a travel mate and a partner in it. Like, okay, I may not know you, but I can tell you together we're going to think through what does it mean to use both sides. Because we're doing it anyway. So what if we just got better at doing it? And I think we dehumanize people. And I would say when we ask them to be completely one way or another, but then there are things like, people who have to make really tough decisions. And it really does affect their emotional well-being. And we tend not to caregive. I think about military folks and things like that. We ask them to just sit in one part because the other part could be dangerous. But then how they human in the world has really been affected.
Yeah, when we train people to lose access to parts of their feelings, when we condition people to have a phobic response to their own empathy, that can really take our species into difficult places and threaten our ability to build a society that we actually want to live in, I mean, I think about the way men respond to discussions of feminism and patriarchy.
Yeah.
And it's because, we have this amazing brain stacked in 3 layers. And the 2 inner layers, they're obsessed with 2 questions. Am I safe and do I belong? And we've created a system where if you're a man and someone begins to speak about the dangers of toxic masculinity, you start to wonder if you're safe and if you belong. And then you can no longer meaningfully participate in that conversation. And instead you're confronted with feelings that you don't want to feel. And so you have to get kind of defensive. You have to go into defensive strategies to regulate those feelings that if we had more access to, we can meaningfully participate. So,
well, it's also the idea that you've been told, yet your value or your worth is being strong, right? So even to engage this conversation, it's not just like, am I safe, but it's, do I matter in this? Like, if you matter, as if there's only so much amount of mattering, but if you take up space, then where does my space go? Whereas it grows, right? We actually grow, the space gets bigger, and there's space for all of us to be bigger. But it's almost like if you take up the space, there's no space for me. Where do I go? And that's that safety, and I recoil. And women, the conversation I've had a lot lately is as I've discovered I'm most likely an Enneagram 3. I've lived my entire life thinking I was a 2 because a 2 is a really nice thing to be as a woman, right? You just get all the affirmation for it. But I had so much shame around achieving that, and anger and hurt around, I want to do these things, but I had shame around it because my love of community was, well, if I become a woman who does all these things, which I was doing anyway, but not addressing, I'll never be accepted by the knight in shining armor or the Christian church or whatever it might be. And so that again comes from this idea of if I'm partnered with someone who's big, I can't be big. And it just destroys all of us. And it makes us all walk around trying to shrink or expand into the space. And I just hate that we do that. And I think the only answer is to start talking about brain, start talking about why are you experiencing that. And sometimes it's great when it's friendly fire, like you as someone who exists as a large white male. I mean height wise, by the way. You've been doing great. Sounded awful. You've been doing great and healthy. But that idea of hey, I know how you're feeling. Is it this? And then it feels a little bit safer, right? You're kind of drawing people. You're speaking their language.
Yeah, I think that's the goal and where we need to go next. And trying to build a society where everybody is valued and included and given the same access to resources.
Right.
Is that those of us who are men or who are white or who are able-bodied or straight or cis or whatever learn to take ownership over our feelings and over our experiences so that we don't get so devastated when we have necessary but difficult conversations. And then we can show up in solidarity with people who are who are just realizing that not everybody has the same life experiences and not everybody has the same access in society and in culture. And when I can come alongside another man and say, oh, yeah, wow, this does sound really scary and really threatening. I get it. It used to sound that way to me, too. And when that person now begins to feel safe and belonging, they can more meaningfully engage in those conversations. And I think that's just such important work.
The conversations are really important. And I think, even why I started working on this podcast or even all the work I do, I just want people to know people. Not just because Barbara Streisand's great, but because I realized I was like, people, my ADHD is fun. I think if people know people who are neuroatypical or who are, the thing that you are calling, like, I know what it means to be this. And most often I say, are you in deep relationship with someone who is that, other thing you've created? It's only through relationship that I think we are able to move a little bit, right? And it's never from like yelling at each other or giving facts. If that was true, my gosh, how much, and how do we weed through facts? We can't, because we're getting so many different, intakes of facts. I mean, I did see something that I did laugh about, which was like, there's all these epidemiologists and all these doctors, but like, I'm really glad your high school friend told you it's safe to go outside now. We have kind of created this weird system where anyone can share information, I guess we could call it information. And then even the like questioning of news that is real to be fake news, right? It's only through relationship and experience that I think that we move a little. If we're in a place of having looked inside. And I think that's what you're asking people to do is like, you can be in better relationship to others by being in better relationship with yourself. All right, friend, we are getting towards the end, which is such a bummer because I all of a sudden forgot I wasn't sitting in your back office. I was like, wait, other people are listening to this. This isn't just like Sarah has some thoughts. And
that's really what this podcast should be called.
Sarah has some thoughts.
Sarah has some thoughts.
And she has some friends who have some better thoughts. So she brings them on and then they have better thoughts. And then some artists. I would love to know, I always say, is there like one tangible way for someone to make space for themselves? Is there like one like starter or just one small thing? Think about it as like, if this is the first time people are hearing this sort of thought, do you think there's just a tiny thing? It doesn't have to be the best thing either. Just like one thing that you think would be helpful for people to start on this journey of making space for themselves.
Every day I go sit in, I've got this nice comfy chair in my office. It's by a sliding glass window. So as I sit there, the sunlight will come in and it's not in my face. It's kind of off to my left. It's just pleasant. I just like it. And I sit in that chair and I say, okay, body, how are we? What do I feel? And that's new for me. I've only been doing this for a couple of years now. And that, you might think a couple of years, that's a long time. But compared to how long I've been alive, a couple of years is just moments.
Or in that body. Yeah, you've had that body the whole time.
And so my body is usually like, how about chicken wings? It's like, okay, I get it. I like chicken wings. What feelings do I feel? And I never know. And so I kind of scan. I start in my belly and I see what I feel and how big I feel it. Do I feel tightness? Do I feel heat? Do I feel cold? Do I feel jitters? Whatever. And then how big? A little tiny dot? Or is as big a circle as I could stretch out my arms? And then I move to my chest and I see what I feel there. A lot of times in this pandemic, I feel tightness in my chest.
Yep.
And my shoulders. Gosh, my shoulders even right now in this podcast are tight. As my body tries to hold so much fear and anxiety about what's happening in the world. And I move, and this process can take 5 or 8 minutes. And
5 or 8, I love you. Yeah.
I move to my head and my face and my eyes, and as I focus on the sensations in all those places, even if I don't know what to name that feeling, and a good therapist can help you learn to name your feelings. If I sit and focus on the sensations long enough, the feeling becomes obvious. So often I feel anxiety. And whenever I feel anxiety, I'm like, okay, who sent you anxiety? Because anxiety is usually sent by another feeling that's afraid to be seen. When I feel anxious, so often what I actually feel is sadness or anger. And then when I realize that those are the feelings, I sit in my chair by myself and I say, it's okay. It's okay to feel that feeling. As it starts to happen, I go, that's good. That's good to feel that feeling. I just give myself the little affirmations I need as a person who's new to emotional expression to feel comfortable allowing my body to feel something. And then I might cry if I'm sad. Or I might get angry and grit my teeth and clench my fists if I'm angry. And as that feeling washes over me, which can happen really quickly in like 30 or 40 seconds, or it can take a few minutes, on the other side of following that feeling the whole way is usually a revelation, some insight about where the feeling came from. And so often right now when I realize that I'm afraid, and I realize what I'm afraid of, I'm afraid that I won't be able to take care of my family through this pandemic, or I'm afraid that someone I know and love is going to die from COVID-19. And giving myself the space to feel those feelings, to let them out, gives me such greater resiliency. It makes me feel better. It lets me be less controlled by impulses and medicating behaviors. And I think such a major growth for so many of us in taking care of ourselves is learning to create the space for our own feelings.
Friend, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for being willing to, I know your week's been really busy, so thank you for taking time to chat with me. And thank you just for being someone that I absolutely love and I can share my feelings with, because it makes it a little bit easier.
I just so love to talk with you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's conversation. I'm challenged by Mike's invitation to make space for our own thoughts and feelings so that we can actually create healthy spaces for others. I loved his practical sitting practice. Maybe this week, take some time to sit and get curious with your own feelings. I've been practicing this, and let me tell you, it's not easy. But I think most things that are helping us grow take us out of our comfort zone and feel like they're really not easy. And now, for a content announcement, speaking of comfort zone, I've had a lot of folks ask to hear more practical ways to physically make space, especially for other people. And as Mike says, it's theory and practical that merge to create the world with which we want to live. So from now on, each month we will be doing one episode where I share with you a design element that makes space. This will help us balance between theory and practice. Our first episode will be next week as I talk about why I put wheels on my pews and what our seating actually communicates to other people. I think this episode will be really helpful as we begin to think through the spaces we will regather in after sheltering in place. These Practical Makers episodes will be shorter and will have YouTube content, including photos, so please let me know how that works out for you. And we'll be taking listener questions for the once a month episodes. So feel free to ask questions on my Instagram. You can find me at RevSarahHeath, or even leave a message on our Anchor site if there's something that you would like to see. And now, with no further ado, this week's inspirational quote. We are very, very small, but we are profoundly capable of very big things. This quote is from renowned scientist Stephen Hawking. Making Spaces is edited by Stephen Burnett from the Cult Podcast. The introduction music is It Can Be Done by Ari via Epidemic Sound. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us and let us know that we're on the right track.